wanted to start off by giving you guys a little bit of background about who we are because, as I'm sure many of you know, this is Alumni Week, and I'm sure many of you haven't heard our voices before.
That's right. Man, so, we used to love coming on here and trying to break down all the crazy political stuff going on in a way that we could all understand together, kind of move through the news, which was a lot more saturated, I thought, at that time. And yet, here we are. It's still pretty jam-packed, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. As Andy just said, the Monkey House was a political talk show, and so, yes, we would basically just come on the air. And, just like many of you, we are not pundits, we're not professors, we are not experts on the subject.
Nope.
Far from it. But we definitely have a lot of concerns on these issues, and we basically come on to make them known. And hopefully to have some productive conversation with all of you, and also some special guests that we had over the years. Speaking of which, we do have a special guest coming on later this hour, Professor Michael Froomkin. We look forward to speaking to him. And in light of the upcoming midterm elections this Tuesday, we're going to be talking about an issue that has gotten a lot of attention this year in particular. It's the stability of American democracy.
That's right.
And obviously there's a lot to dissect from there, but obviously Professor Michael Froomkin will be able to chime in and give us some very insightful, some very professional opinions.
That's right.
And we look forward to that.
Yeah, especially as he's a Yale graduate, a lawyer, and a law professor at UM. I mean, who else to have on? You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
To help us see what's going on.
Before we do that, though, I did want to, I guess, talk also about a little bit how we came to start with this show, because we really did come in this with a bit of a spur of the moment sort of thing, didn't we, Andy?
Absolutely, Izzy. Man, I think it was Spanish class, was it?
It was Spanish class.
Yeah, we met in Spanish class. We were just talking, and we were trying to process the kind of election results that were going on back in This was 2017.
The year we met was 2017, and I believe we met in the spring, and then we started our show in the summer. So to my recollection, I don't know that there were any elections going on, but for sure this was the beginning basically of the Trump administration, and there were quite a few news in the cycle of that period of time.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so that's the beauty of what's going on here at this station, is that we had an idea. What if we wanted to just have a show? I mean, what if we wanted to? And on our way back from one of those classes, I thought, you know what, let's sit down. Let's put together an actual show. Imagine we're on the air right now. What are we doing? Okay? And we just were able to go through this, discuss it, and bring that plan to life, thanks to WVUM. That's right here what you're listening to, 90.5 FM. Please donate, by the way.
Yes. And to any University of Miami students who are listening right now, please know that the studio is at the Witten University Center, and if any of you have any ideas for any possible shows, or you want to make your voice known on the radio, or you would like to get, basically your foot in the radio industry, this is a great place to do it. The studio here is state-of-the-art. Trust me, I've walked into both WLRN studios and also this studio, and this is the real deal. Trust me, this is the exact same technology that they use, and we're very fortunate to have it. And, to many, obviously to most people, this may be considered a bit of an underutilized resource, considering how much potential there is here, and how many people I'm sure don't know about it. I almost kind of wish we knew about it earlier, really.
Yep, and I mean, we're doing our part to let all of you know. Any students listening in, this could be you. It's really that simple. You've got an idea, you want to say it. I mean, if you're scared, I was terrified the day before we ever came on here. I was like, man, what is going to happen? It'll be fine. You can do it.
Oh, yeah. So, that's totally natural. Every time going on the air, you just have the pre-talk jitters. I got to be honest, that never subsides. Even going into today, given that it had been 3 years since our last time on the air, I was very nervous going in. But now that I'm here, I actually do feel much more relaxed. And
I feel more relaxed hearing your radio voice. But let's not. I don't want to get too much into that.
We both have a great radio voice.
2 hours coming up.
And we also just want to give a shout out to anyone who's listening for homecoming week, basically.
Oh,
We
yes.
just came on campus, and yeah, it's pretty busy here. And they have that big UM and FSU game, I believe it is.
Oh, absolutely. He's only confused because once we beat FSU, it's going to be yesterday's news, and nobody really cares, after we beat them. So, anyway,
Well, I mean, yes. Given, I'll be honest, I'm not much of a sports guy myself, but given that this was my alma mater, I suppose I am morally obligated to support the Canes. So let me just say once and for all, go Canes, go get them.
all right, man.
And
Okay.
that's the end of my frat speech, basically.
Well, I wanted to invite someone who, by just chance, happened to line her show up with ours today. We have Leah Stern in the studio with us, finally having the this prophecy of a WVUM show of the Monkey House. How do you feel being here finally?
This is like literally a dream come true because maybe I was just thinking it, but I feel like I was always begging you, please let me on the Monkey House, please let me on the Monkey House. I have so many opinions.
Oh my god, I swear we would have had you on immediately. I mean, just like right now.
Maybe
Yeah.
everything happens for a reason. Maybe
Definitely a moment of serendipity.
today is the day. It's serendipitous. It's kismet. The stars are aligned. I don't know. Mars is in retrograde. Whatever
I feel
that
all that.
means.
We've got 28 missiles in North Korean atmosphere,
Oh,
all this
God.
fun stuff. Listen, man, we have a lot to talk about.
We do.
It's
It's a crazy time. I mean, actually, you know what? No, nothing has really happened these last 3 years, right? It's been pretty quiet.
it's been 3 years.
Yeah.
Don't give me the numbers, kid.
Okay,
Jeez.
I will not give you the numbers. Leah did just have her all request show, and we did listen to quite a bit of it. It was really great, Leah.
Thank you. It means so much. I took over the Vibe of the Week slot. They have their show every Friday, 3:30 to 4:30. And the vibe, I think, since it was an all request show, I was saying the vibe is whatever you want it to be. That's the vibe, because send a request. Then a lot of the requests so happened to line up, 2013, 2014 indie. So we're like, maybe that's the vibe.
Mm.
Then I settled the final vibe is we're having fun. Because that's what we do at WVUM. We have fun. And I could not agree more with what you're saying. Like, it feels like we never left. It feels
honestly
so natural
does.
to be back on air.
Yeah.
Right. WVUM is just, I feel like, in some way tattooed into my soul, basically. Like, I may have left it, but it never left me.
Yes.
But yeah, Leah, I did also just want to ask you, we talked about our, experience coming on the show, coming on the station, really. What was your, experience like coming on here? How'd you find out about it?
Honestly, I think I read about it or something, and I've always been interested in music and knew I never wanted to be in a sorority and all that. Maybe it's dramatic to say I never fit in, right? Because that's maybe a reach, but I knew I didn't fit in the traditional way. And so I liked music. I wanted to do something fun. I think I found it on Google or something. I went on the website and applied.
Like all great things.
Yeah, Google. Shout out.
That's
As if they need it, right?
Yeah, who's that?
Have you've never heard of Google?
No, not really. I really stick to politics.
Yeah, more of a
and
Yahoo
WVUM.
guy,
Wait, what was that? Ask Jeeves?
Ask Jeeves. That's right. Duck, duck, gone with the wind. It is what it is.
I just scream, what's this? And hope someone screams back into the void. But yeah, then I just applied, got trained a few weeks later, and then didn't have my show until the following semester. So a whole summer passed, and I think that's fine. Like I said, everything happens for a reason, and the stars were aligned or whatever. So I had my show 2016 to 2019. They keep letting me back here. I don't know. I just played a Harry Styles song before. I don't know if they'll let me back after that.
Hey, we've played much crazier stuff on the air during our time, so no need to worry there. Yeah, we're in good company here. Did you also do an all request show at the time?
No, I didn't. I just had my rotation show. I'm going to shout out myself here.
Oh, go for it.
One, best rotation show from 2017 to 2018.
Hey.
And then again the next year, Joanna and I had our show 2018 to 2019, and we won again that year. So I am a 2-time best rotation show winner, as voted by my peers here at the station. We used to have our award show, finals.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they still do it. COVID, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Oh my god! I can't believe somehow the entirety of COVID fit between when we left and us being here right now.
Yeah, it really does feel like, to an extent, we graduated just at the right time, because
So lucky, yeah. 2018.
the abrupt transition, I imagine, for so many,
Hello,
not just...
this is Smo, and you're listening to WVUM 90.5 FM.
Pardon for the technical difficulties, my friends.
Yeah,
But as I was
we
just
are
saying, yes, this is exactly what 3 years does to people. But no, I imagine it must have been a very abrupt, and to some perhaps a very traumatic transition from going to, going about your day, going to class, going in person, going to lectures, and then all of a sudden being thrust into remote learning. We never had to go through that, but
luckily.
yeah, well, in work, obviously we may have had to do that in some capacity. But when it comes to education and learning, I can't even imagine. So, our sympathies are definitely with those who were affected by those.
Well, I was in grad school. I had to switch to online learning for grad school.
Jesus.
It was fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it would have been much worse. Like, my sister, she was like a freshman in college for like a semester. And then COVID happened. And so I think definitely some people like lost that, like, and I'm using air quotes here, like traditional like experience. Whereas I had already been through undergrad, did a semester of grad school in person, and then just did it online. I think you lose something.
Yeah, definitely. It's also really hard to imagine that from a perspective where we just narrowly missed, that effect of COVID, having to do these online classes. But we're more out of it at this point.
Right. It is, of course, important to note the pandemic is not yet over, but we are, now in the phase where we can do these in-studio appearances again, and it's great. Although, of course, we are still living in particularly crazy times, even after, the worst of COVID, so to speak, at least in the United States, has passed. There have still been a lot of issues, many of which, we're going to be discussing later on throughout the next hour or so. And, what do you say we go on break right now, Andy?
I think we do that.
Okay, excellent.
Keep it locked.
So we're going to go on break, and after that, we're going to have Professor Michael Froomkin. We also just wanted to extend an invitation to ask any questions you may have to us, and we'll get to them at some point. That's 786-309-8861. Once again, that's 786-309-8861. Keep it locked. We'll see you in a bit. And welcome back to the Monkey House, everyone. And looks like we're listening to some music once again right now. Let's put that down, shall we? Excellent. Excellent.
Music on WVUM. What is that?
Music on WVUM. Who could have heard of such a thing? Anyways, my name is Israel.
And I'm Andy.
And thank you for those who are tuning in just now. This is the Monkey House on WVUM 90.5 FM, The Voice, and this is Alumni Week. A very coveted time of the year in which alumni get to, alumni of all years past get to come back and do a one-off show for all of you and basically just have some fun.
And try to entertain. All right, we got quality coming for you here with an interview with our guest.
Yes, Professor Michael Froomkin, everyone.
Hello.
Professor Froomkin, let me just turn you up real quick. Okay.
All right.
Can you hear us, sir?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Hello, Professor. And with the U.S. midterms on the horizon, fears about the stability of U.S. democracy at a historic high, we just wanted to have you, just to introduce you to everyone. He is a University of Miami professor of administrative law, AI robot law, and jurisprudence. He is also a Yale graduate and runs a political blog on discourse.net. So, Professor Froomkin, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, could you just tell us and the listeners a little bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is probably where I got the politics bug. And also, I had the only elected office I've ever held, I was elected to Neighborhood Planning Commission number 3, which in all the other parts of the city have big budgets because there's a based on poverty levels. But I lived in the poor part of D.C., so we just had a basic budget. And it got spent on putting on free concerts in the summer and then, cleaning up afterwards. And I ran because I noticed that all the jobs were going to friends and people on the committee, and I didn't think that was fair. And then I got elected, and I learned one of my most important political lessons. The reason they gave it to their friends was, this was the DC bureaucracy. They signed up people for the summer to pick up the trash. If the people would sign in on the first day, then they'd never turn up again. It took DC 4 months to get them off the payroll, and by then summer was over. They never did any work. So the reason they gave it to their friends is they could make their friends pick up the trash. If they didn't pick up the trash, the Park Service would cancel the concert. So I learned a really important lesson about law on the ground versus law on the books.
That's fascinating.
So I went to college, majored in economics and history, worked at the newspaper, helped set up the John Anderson field office for the state of Connecticut, which was a third-party candidacy. After I graduated, I became briefly a press secretary for a congressional campaign that got swamped in the Reagan landslide. Then I went off to Cambridge, England, for a couple of years on a fellowship in law school. Clerked for a couple of years in Chicago and DC, and then I came here to Miami Law, where I've been ever since.
Excellent.
And when I got here, it was publish or perish, so I couldn't do political work, which I missed. But the other reason, of course, is really to do something serious in Miami. You need to speak Spanish, and I don't.
That is definitely a boon here.
Yeah, it's important. It's what the voters essentially. So I concentrated on my teaching and eventually opened up a blog. And when I opened up a blog, I really, back in September of 2003, it's hard to believe, like, and I called it discourse.net because I was writing a paper at the time on discourse theory and Jürgen Habermas. And I really thought blogging was going to be a big intellectual conversation in visible college with academics all over the world. And I could not have been more wrong.
Oh, yeah. The internet is often disappointing in this regard.
Well, not just that, but it's too hard to write something of academic quality on a regular basis like that that's outside your work. It got in the way of the real work I wanted to do. So it became a place to just write about what I was thinking and more academic stuff that wasn't going to be part of a publication. And then I got radicalized because about a year after I started blogging, even less, the torture memos came out. And, the U.S. government justified torture with memos from people at the Office of Legal Counsel that were really shoddy. I was offended by the conclusion. I was offended by the lack of craft. Of course, if you've done it well, you couldn't have come to that conclusion.
And that was around 2013, I believe. Is that right?
This is 04.
04.
Torture memos are 04. I mean, and they were really evil. They were evil, and they were just ugly in their stupidity. They didn't cite the major case in the area because it hurt their cause. So I got really busy writing about that, and before people who were full-time bloggers picked it up, really. And at my height, I had about 10,000 readers a day. So I was a real, B-list blogger in those days. And one day I sort of looked at the amount of work it was taking and said, this is getting in the way of my real work. So I dialed back, started losing readers. If you don't post every day, you start losing readers.
Yeah.
So, posting rates went down, readership went down, but it was still the right decision. I published a lot of articles. I won UN Distinguished Faculty Scholar Award a couple of years ago. Along the way, I also got seriously ill and didn't post at all for several months. So then traffic went really down. And now, except for when I'm covering local politics around election time, I'm getting 400 a day. It boosts up quite a bit around election.
I can imagine. We recently did see your voter's guide, actually, for the upcoming midterm elections, and we always did imagine that your blog was seen as a reliable source for those who had some difficulty researching some local candidates, and you provide a very ample amount of information for every single one of your suggestions and justifications.
Well, I started doing that a long time ago because I had trouble finding out what I wanted to know about the judicial election and the constitutional amendments and the county charter amendments, things like that. So I started doing that, and then, once you've done it a few times, people come looking for it. Whenever I'm late posting them. If the absentee ballots go out, and I was supposed to, people start emailing, people I don't know start emailing me saying, "Where is it?" Which is kind of, both flattering and annoying.
Yeah.
But so I don't know. I think there must be a fair number of people who read. Certainly, traffic goes up, and a lot of people write these things. I'm really, that's flattering.
That's
and
great.
Local elections matter much more than people think.
Yes,
No, absolutely.
I mean,
Professor.
that's how we found you, right? Because when it came to local elections, Izzy and I always had a hard time finding out what some of the more technical amendments that were being passed, what they even meant, And a friend of ours, Zoab Anjum,
Shout out.
yep, shout out to him. He directed us to your blog, which I don't know how you were able to secure discourse.net as the website. That's like, wow, kudos. But it's become our go-to, and you have this insight of the law. As you said, you've been boots on the ground with the law, and you know the difference between academic law and what happens in practice, right? And you give us that perspective about judges and various roles that normally I didn't even know what to put. I would kind of avoid
my
them.
son, who's just graduated from another law school, doesn't really approve of my blogging. He says I'm too easy on the judges.
Interesting.
Not partisan enough to satisfy him.
I see.
Because for the judges, at least, I always start with a presumption that they ought to be retained if they're in office. So I don't want them to feel they have to be too partisan to curry favor. But most years, most times, I argue for the retention of most judges. This year was an enormous exception. There were a bunch of really terrible court.
And that's right, sir. And the midterms are actually, as you know, just 4 days away from now. And one of the biggest concerns voters have, according to numerous polls, which is really the crux of our entire discussion today, is the state of American democracy. The threat to democracy, of course, is a manifold issue, but one particular concerns that voters have expressed are the sheer amount of candidates who are either skeptical of or outright deny the results of the 2020 election. And to put it into perspective, Professor, of the 27 Secretary of State races around the country, 13 of them have an election denier on the ballot. These are officials who would be overseeing elections if elected. And we just want to ask you, how concerned are you about the prevalence of election denialism going into the midterms?
Well, the whole election is keeping me awake at night. I mean, it's very, very scary and worrying. And election denialism is a particularly visible and nasty piece of it. But it's the denial of facts more generally that has me really worried. I mean, here in Florida, we have a governor and a Surgeon General for the state who's sort of been denying basics about vaccines. That's not surprisingly has one of the biggest death rate of elderly people in the country.
That's right.
So, it's being anti-science, being anti-fact, it's believing made-up stories, like the spread of misinformation or disinformation, which has always been part of American politics, right? I mean, I'm not a believer in great, wonderful, past, but this is an unusually bad time for that stuff.
And as I mentioned before, Professor, threats to democracy have indeed ranked high on voters' list of overall concerns. But however, there was a recent New York Times Siena poll from last month that you may have heard that indicated that while voters are in fact concerned about democracy, they do not consider protecting it to be their highest priority, and instead are more concerned about issues like inflation and the rising cost of living. With respect to threats to democracy, this seems to indicate that there is a significant disparity between the gravity of the issue and the urgency with which voters are treating it. Why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of these things turn on how you word the polls, but I will say that in my experience, the American public takes time to get to the right place. It doesn't turn on a dime. So, the arc of justice bends slowly. So I think part of it is that not everybody is on the same speed in terms of recognizing, how bad things are. I think that's a big part of it. And, back when I was working for a congressional candidate, we used to go to the state fair, and I used to go to talks that you gave and stuff. And it was always very striking. Regular folks don't think about politics all day. They really don't. And indeed, that's in some ways a success. A healthy political system is one which provides conditions people can live their lives and don't have to worry about politics every day like they do in Ukraine.
That's right.
So, that's not entirely a bad thing. But a consequence of that is people don't think about politics all the time. And this other stuff impinges on them slowly. And it's worse now when we have so many separate channels for getting information. Right? If you're a Fox News viewer all day, penetrating that bubble with accurate information is really tough.
That's
So it may slow it down even more. And because there's now quite a large group of people who share the same ideas, which I would call false, just factually false, like the election deniers or the vaccine deniers.
Of course.
They're big enough to reinforce each other. So there's critical mass.
Yeah, that is a trend that we really have been observing in the last few decades, I think, is the balkanization of the media and the ways through which people absorb information. I believe that's... Yes? Can you hear us?
I've lost you. You've lost me.
Oh, can you hear us now, sir?
I can't hear you anymore. I'm really sorry. I keep talking, but I don't know if they're there.
Oh.
Okay.
Just one moment, sir.
I think we're going to have to go to a quick break then.
Yes,
and,
sorry, folks. We got some technical difficulties, and we will figure this out in a moment. Thank you. And that was... Once again, we have music playing. Oh, yeah. There's a party here. Oh, yeah.
Oh, WVUM.
Oh, yeah. This is great stuff. And, okay. Party's over. Welcome back to WVUM, everyone. WVUM 90.5 FM, the voice of the University of Miami. This is Izzy.
And I'm Andy.
And we were just speaking to Professor Michael Froomkin, and he is back on the air with us. Can you hear us, Professor?
Absolutely.
Excellent. So we just wanted to ask you, while we were on the topic of American democracy, we wanted to ask you, Professor, about a paper you've written called Fixing the Senate. And in the abstract of this paper, you actually start off by saying in pretty clear terms, quote, "The Senate is the greatest remaining impediment to democracy in the U.S. Constitution, worse even than the Electoral College." You go on to explain that because the Senate's structure establishes representational parity among the states, in other words, 2 representatives per state, citizens of different states receive vastly different levels of representation. Professor, in light of historic gridlock and polarization over the course of the last few decades, there has indeed been greater discussion among scholars like yourselves about the pitfalls of the U.S. Senate. In your paper, you actually go all the way back to the years of our nation's founding, as you discuss the Connecticut Compromise of 1787. For those who don't know, this compromise settled the issue of state representation by giving birth to our current form of government that includes, of course, the U.S. Senate. I guess what I'm wondering is, to what extent does the evolving discourse on the supposed anti-democratic nature of the Senate have to do with historic fallacy on the part of the founders versus some of the more recent challenges Congress has faced in getting legislation and other priorities done?
All right, let me unpack that. First off, I'm not going to sign on to the term historic fallacy. Right? They made a political deal. They needed all the states to club together. Small states were legitimately and for good reason afraid of being overwhelmed by the big states. And at that time, states were more distinct than they are today, and regional instincts were more distinct than they are today. Today, the divisions tend to be urban-rural, coastal inland, rather than Rhode Island versus Pennsylvania, or Pennsylvania versus Virginia. So Texas is a special case, but we'll get to that. And also the ratio they agreed to, this Connecticut Compromise, was vastly less than equal to what we have today. What we have today is some states have huge populations compared to other states. Right? I mean, here's a shocking fact. If Los Angeles County were a state, it would rank 11th in population.
That's right.
Right? I mean, so...
That's right.
That's incredible, and it's geographically larger than 2 existing states, Delaware and Rhode Island.
I mean,
So there's this incredible unfairness to the people in California compared to the people of Wyoming, and it's getting worse every year. And it turns out that this has enormous political consequences, because what we've done is gerrymandered unintentionally, and for what were good reasons at the time, gerrymandered the U.S. against the interests of urban people of the city, and in favor of very sparsely populated states. And that has consequences because they have different politics and different interests. sometimes different needs, although one could argue about that, but certainly different politics. And I think personally it's connected to a really quite important fact, which is that people feeling that the federal government isn't responsive to their needs is, in my opinion, very largely justified. And part of that's gridlock, but an awful lot of that's the gerrymandering. So, we have huge majorities for some things that Congress is just not about to do. The popular majority is there, but the votes aren't there in the Senate. $15 minimum wage is supported by practically 2/3 of the voters.
And we're still not represented with it. That's correct.
Majorities across the country are concerned about climate change. About 70% of people in the U.S. say they're concerned. Don't get much out of the Senate. Majorities want decriminalization of marijuana. Got it in 27 states, District of Columbia, including in many of the others. Can't get that out of the Senate.
That's the main issue that I'm seeing. These are the perils of a governing structure in which vast swaths of Americans in densely populated states can be silenced by more favorably represented smaller states. And for those of you tuning in,
you can make all the noise you want. You're not being silent. You're just we claim we have. We like to think we have a true representative democracy with one person, one vote, but we don't. We don't at all, and it's much worse than it was a generation ago.
Just looking at the numbers, it's insane to me, right? Florida has 2 Senate seats. Everyone has 2 Senate seats. That's the whole point of the Senate and how it's set up. Yet we have 22 million Americans in Florida. 22 million. Now Wyoming, right, only has 580,000 Americans. That's 38 times the representative power in the Senate for a Wyoming resident than a Floridian. And
that's not fair.
Listen, you said in that article, and I quote, Article 5 prohibits depriving any state of its equal suffrage, i.e. voting power equal to that of other states in the Senate, without that state's consent. Why wasn't this article used to demand more Senate seats for states like ours? Does our voting power deficit not count as suffrage?
Harder, right? Because this is about the state as a state, not the people of the state as the people. And that's the only entrenched remaining part of the Constitution. There was another entrenched part that prevented the Congress from stopping the importation of slaves for a couple decades. That's ancient history now. And the reason this is entrenched is, again, the small states said without protection, we're afraid you'll vote to take away our equal representation. This is part of the deal. But now we're stuck with it, right? This is the hardest part of the constitutional amendments are incredibly hard.
Oh, yeah.
This is even worse because it says you can't amend this part of the Constitution, or as we argue in the paper, you can't amend this part of the Constitution until you take that clause out. We also in the paper give a lot of different tricks you can try to use to limit the harmful effects of such an unfair gerrymandered Senate. But they're all complicated.
Yeah, and you do state it's obvious, right? Reforming the Senate would be no easy task, and you just covered the entrenchment clause with us. You're mentioning it. You wrote about just the kind of generational nationwide support that would be needed to even get possible reform on a ballot. Even then, the Supreme Court also poses a potential obstacle, as they would be able to rule on the constitutionality of any reform, right?
So it depends where the reform comes from, right? So if it's a statutory reform, absolutely that's subject to judicial review. If the state passed a constitutional amendment, it would be conceivable that the Supreme Court would say it was unconstitutional. But that's never happened before, and that would be fairly shocking. It would also depend what it was, right? So, for example, if the states voted to change Senate representation without complying with the entrenchment clause, that would be unconstitutional. You would expect the court to strike that down. Right. The exciting question is, what if we got rid of the entrenchment clause in step 1? So then in step 2, we could try to reform the Senate. Personally, I don't think the Supreme Court would prevent that. But of course, you never know, especially with this very active court. You never know.
Despite recent failures at the federal level to combat even gerrymandering, are there really any promising opportunities to alleviate these kinds of concerns at the state or local levels?
Well, when you say these kinds of concerns, I guess it depends. If you mean the imbalance of power in the Senate,
Yes.
not that many. Not that
Jeez.
many, right? The things we can do to get more people to vote, but that's still within the confines of the basic structure of the, which gives unequal voting power, depending on where you happen to live.
And so clearly gerrymandering will continue to
I'll tell you one thing we could do, which would make it less bad, is kill the filibuster.
I mean, how could we
the
do that?
filibuster means that, instead of having the 51 least populous states being able to get their way, the 40 least populous states get their way in blocking things. And that's a big number, right? So that would be a big change. So, for example, within a filibuster, even if you had a small partisan majority, like the Democrats sort of do now, then you might see more legislation.
You mentioned, and I quote, despite the serious political challenges, there are some reasons for hope about the feasibility of constitutional reform, particularly if reformers can succeed in moving the goalposts via the passage of interim statutory reforms. So you've already mentioned, I believe, one or two kinds of things like that, but what are some examples of state laws that might aid in reimagining or removing the Senate?
Well, again, I don't see that we have a supremacy clause, right? So the state of Florida can pass any law it likes, California or any other state. That isn't going to change the constitutional structure, because that's how our system works, right? The federal laws, the federal constitution, trump state laws, state constitution. So all states can do is work around the edges. We can make election day a holiday to try to get turnout to go up.
So you think turnout might be a great way to combat?
I think another great thing would be to copy Alaska. I think what the Alaskans did with instant runoff voting or single transferable vote, whatever you want to call it, whereby you mark your ballot with your choices in ranked order, is the key. Because right now we have two-party gridlock. It's really hard to start a third party because who wants to throw away their vote? But if you have ranked choice voting, you put first choice for the Greens, the Libertarians, whoever it is you like. And if they don't get a lot of votes, your vote then goes to a larger party that still counts. And that's huge. That could really open the people's imagination and possibility.
And you did mention,
I mean, that's incredible, though. Sorry, it's just I hadn't actually personally heard of that. I feel like I should have.
Right. Well, that's the most recent congressional election in Alaska that Sarah Palin lost was run under those rules. Although, interestingly, if you game it out how the votes are actually cast, she'd have lost anyway. But it didn't actually, in that case, necessarily change the result, at least with regards to Palin. It might have changed it as regards to who her opponent was.
I just like that it gives an opportunity for you to vote for something that is of a third-party nature without giving up your entire vote otherwise. It's
about 10 years ago, I went down to the court when they were doing a revision of the Coral Gables Charter. I went down to the Charter Revision Committee and pitched I'm doing this for Coral Gables. And they looked at me, they listened to me, and they said, no, too complicated. Voters won't understand that we can't do that.
So that meeting right there, that very non-cordial confrontation. I mean, how can people aid in that kind of thing? How can we bring that to the forefront so that that kind of voting?
You have to talk to your elected representatives and start petitions. You start where you are. That's all. You start where you are. So talk it up. Tell people this is what you want. Now, of course, the last thing, the club, Coral Gables elections are pretty clubby. Turnout is low. They're often scheduled on different days. The general election to keep down the voters, the people who really care. But the last thing they want to do is open the door to unknowns. So they weren't necessarily the best place to start. It's kind of an idea. But I think the whole country should do it.
And
that can be done locally.
I did quickly want to go back to what you just recommended about possible ways to fix the Senate. And you did mention the filibuster. As we know, the filibuster is something that has been covered quite extensively in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. We saw the failure to repeal the filibuster be essentially the reason why pieces of legislation like the For the People Act, or even the current push to codify Roe v. Wade. And we saw the filibuster and the failure to get rid of the filibuster be the reasons why both of those pushes for now have failed, which is why I was asking earlier. And even though everyone might not see it, sir, as historic fallacy, it is certainly the case that there is historical precedence for these kinds of discussions, and people have been debating about the Senate since the existence, since the birth of this nation. So that's why I was wondering how much of this recent push, this recent increase in discourse, have to do with analyzing that precedence and the historic debates that have gone on versus the recent issues.
When we go down that road, because if you think about it, the framers didn't really believe in democracy as we now understand it. Right? Their idea of who should vote was white males, and for some of them, white male property owners. Although it quickly got democratized to white males, but left out women, left out blacks, left out Native Americans. And it's not until maybe the Civil War Amendment, especially the 14th Amendment, that we started adopting what we now see as the modern idea of representation among men, and then of course votes for women comes even later. So it's been a process, it's been an evolution, a change towards an ideal of one person, one vote, and real representative democracy. And I much prefer to plant my flag on that, on some idea of progress and equality, than on trying to decide what, how bound we are by the Connecticut Compromise, or what, Ben Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, somebody thought. I mean, some of them were quite progressive, but lots of them weren't. And I just don't think that's profitable. We've had a lot of changes in how we do things. We changed the way the Senate's elected, right? The senators were originally elected by the legislatures of the state. They really represent the states very directly that way. And we changed that. It's all part of a move over time towards better and better democracy. And the problem is right now we've sort of gone backwards a little bit, probably because of these population shifts. And what we need to do is dedicate ourselves to going forward again.
And it's this
and it has to be a popular movement, because it's never going to pass a constitutional amendment unless some states act against their short-term self-interest. Right?
Well, I mean, we see that happening.
Why would you vote for this? Because you understand what's important principle for the nation. And it can happen. In the EU, when they reformed their voting rules, the small states voluntarily gave up some of their power in the interest of having a functioning European Union.
Yeah, of course it could happen. The United Kingdom entirely voted in Brexit. I think you could shoot yourself in the foot.
Well, that's a different problem. That's a terrible example. And I don't think that was about democracy directly. I mean, well...
Yeah, you know what, you're right. I don't even want to bring them into this. That's true.
It was about lies about how much money they give to the National Health Service, none of which ever materialized. That was anti-immigrant.
And, but the reason I did ask that question before, sir, is obviously the idea of repealing the filibuster is largely seen as controversial to some because of the idea that repealing the filibuster only sounds good to those who are in power, and that if the shoe were on the other foot, that it would be seen as a bad thing because it could be seen as a potential tool for stripping away further aspects of democracy. What do you think about that?
I think there's a lot of truth in that. That if you take away the filibuster, you'll get some legislation you don't like. But that's the price of democracy. Elections ought to have consequences.
Okay, and while we are talking about elections, I did want to move back to a local scale, sir, and discuss the upcoming midterms. Sometimes just saying "go vote" to people is not enough. I think one of the most common complaints I've heard from people who choose not to vote is the notion that there's nobody on the ticket that represents them. Some might say, quote, "the candidates are too partisan," or "there aren't enough options." And to the latter point, there might be something to that. When you look at the Florida elections this year, for instance, we only had two candidates running in the Democratic primary. One who was a Republican turned Democrat who lost a gubernatorial race in 2014 and who, as of right now, has raised less money than his opponent, who has less ads on TV than his opponent, and who has consistently fallen behind his opponent in the polls. So, what do you think are some things that ordinary people can do to have more representative candidates in primaries and to feel like they have greater control of the political system overall?
Well, again, I'm going to split that into two questions. Right? One is better representation, the other is more control of the party. Better representation, you just have to go out and vote. Sometimes, you hold your nose and vote for the less bad candidate. That is certainly what we have at first past the post now, where you just get to vote for one candidate. You just have to, make it. Sometimes you have to vote tactically and vote for someone you think will win because you don't want the other person. Telling your representatives you want more choices, things like single transferable voters, sometimes both runoff voting, would be good. They need to hear that. Right? 'Cause right now they think it's a crazy thing that almost nobody, only pointy-headed law professors want. They need to hear from the public on that side. I could see them thinking that from the dais, Columbia Commission. And they weren't totally wrong because nobody else has heard of it. They have to hear those things a lot. Now, for getting more control of the system of the party, that's really very hard because it's like what Oscar Wilde said about socialism: too many meetings. Right? The parties run on meetings and money. Right? So one way is make $1 billion and then you can get a lot of money to a party and you get a voice. That's a terrible thing.
Jeez.
Right? It would be really great if we get money out of politics. But that's a whole other conversation. So taking the system we have, really, the way to have a say is to go to a lot of meetings or run yourself. But usually you have to meet a lot of people first to have a chance.
And do you even see any, what's the forecast of legally dealing with campaign financing? Do you see any attempts that may be happening soon that will finally limit that so it's not such a heavy influence on the outcome of our elections?
So as a political matter, no. Right now it's not on the major agenda.
How can that be?
Because the people who are there are the ones who profited and succeed in the current system and have no particular vested interest in changing to a system that might not be as good for them.
Well.
And it's also difficult, right? I mean, with the Supreme Court decisions that effectively equate money with speech and say you have a right to free speech, and therefore, since money is like speech in campaigns, every dollar has the same rights as every other dollar, and every dollar has the same rights as any word. So, it would probably take a constitutional amendment to overturn that. Again, there are complicated workarounds you can do with federal campaign financing, for example, in which people go into voluntarily. But given the huge amount of money that's going into politics right now, the amount of public money you'd have to make available to candidates in order to get them to choose the public funding instead of the private funding is so high that I think people will probably blanch at the price ticket.
Jeez. And I imagine a lot of this, gerrymandering only stands to continue that status quo.
But it's really complicated. Deciding who's entitled to public money and who are the fringe candidates who are not requires really difficult judgments that tend to be the only way we've thought of doing them is either petition campaigns, which usually they want such high numbers it's not possible, or how many votes you got last time. That's your chicken and egg problem, right? No financing, no votes, no financing.
And with the amendment that is currently up for votes in the midterms right now, there was one that has to do with a constitutional gathering of some sort. Is that maybe an avenue that we can?
Florida's a really gerrymandered state at the state level, right? So I've been talking most about federal law, but one of the funny things about Florida is it's pretty close to a 50-50 state.
Yes.
So we have a legislature which is way more unbalanced than the popular vote, and that's because of pretty smart gerrymandering. Now, the only way really in the last 20 years practically that we've been able to get changes that reflect what people want but the gerrymandered majority doesn't want is through constitutional amendment. Then it is one person, one vote. That's once you get it on the ballot. And there are two routes in Florida to get a constitutional amendment, right? One is you get a petition, but it has to be pretty spread out over the state. And then you write a text, which you have to get the Supreme Court to accept it meets various complicated criteria. They don't all.
Of course.
But if you do that, you get on the ballot. And the interesting thing is get on the ballot, pretty nutty thing to get on the ballot, right? We have an amendment that protects pregnant pigs for the Constitution. And that's one of the things that's used to attack the process. Docs talk to me, docs stay, right? And the other method is every 20 years, the Florida Constitution mandates the creation of a commission to propose amendments. And that's what the current ballot of Constitutional Amendment 2 is designed to cut off. Because again, that's another route that the people may have their say. Now, I say this in full understanding that the most recent iteration of the commission was not particularly great. The commission was facts in order not to do anything that would offend Republicans. The commission put together amendments. They came up with a lot of amendments and put them together. They tried to put unpalatable ones on the same vote as the palatable one, in the hope that the one that people liked would drag the one that people didn't like into law. And that was really, I think, dirty politics.
Okay.
So we're coming off a cycle where the commission was not at its best. But nonetheless, it remains one of the two avenues for a popular will to really triumph directly without having to go through a legislature, which isn't terribly representative of the state.
Okay.
So I'm against that amendment. I think on balance, it's a bad idea.
Yeah, it seems like it is definitely in our best interest to vote against Amendment 2. Because
well, again, the most recent commission experience does give some merit to people who say, it doesn't work anymore. But I think we need more than one bad year before we throw it out.
I mean, that makes sense to me. 20 years in between each meeting doesn't make it hard to decide. But either way, I really want to thank you for answering all of our questions, Professor. I know these aren't really the most academic questions you've dealt with, and it was a real pleasure having you on. Are you currently working on anything that you'd like to briefly mention? Self-plug.
Well, there is the paper you mentioned. I'm writing a bunch of papers on privacy. I've got a paper that's coming out just a few months on how we can use existing law to protect personal privacy much more than anybody expects. How you use certain regulatory strategies to achieve much more privacy than people commonly believe.
Okay.
And I got a paper which is coming out in a few days, I think, on virtual law school. Teaching by Zoom and what it might mean for the teaching profession.
I think this.
Again, all these papers are available on my personal blog, which is law.tm, like trademark. But I'm afraid I've got too many of these things.
I'm sorry, you have law.tm as a website.
That's my personal website.
That's your personal 5-letter. What? That's incredible. Well, that is
Thank you.
It's like a lot of things in
professor.
life. Being early beats being smart.
Yes. This is law professor Michael Froomkin, everyone. You can read more about him and his opinions on his blog discourse.net and, of course, law.tm, his personal website. Once again, thank you so much for being with us. Wish you the best.
Yes, thank you, Professor Froomkin. And
pleasure.
Yes, go ahead.
It's a pleasure. Do it again in 10 years.
Hopefully our next show will be much sooner than that. But thank you again, Professor. So right now we're going to be going on a little music break, and when we come back, Andy and I will be discussing some other questions related, or some other issues related to the upcoming midterms. We also hope to field some questions from all of you, so if there's anything you'd like us to respond to as we come back from the break, please tell us now at 786-309-8861. Once again, that's 786-309-8861. We will be right back.
Keep it locked.
And welcome back to the Monkey House on WVUM 90.5 FM, The Voice. My name is Israel.
And I'm Andy.
And we hope that you guys were able to stick around for that interview we just had with University of Miami law professor Michael Froomkin. It was a very illuminating interview, and we hope you guys enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. Man, it's funny. it's easy to forget, and he brought this point up that back when the Constitution was formed and all these processes were going on, it was absolutely not an ideal time. It's not like everybody could vote. It was nothing like that, and we all know this. But one of my I don't even know if I'd call it favorite, but interesting tidbits is that they used to just basically bribe you to vote with beer. Okay, this is all this was back at like the Washington election and such.
Right. It
Where
almost
they
sounds
just-
like an urban legend when
It
you
sounds
said it.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like it was a common practice to just have like some a couple barrels, just bring out kegs, and be like, hey, come vote for us. Our beer is better.
Yeah, I mean, there have been crazier practices in voting history for sure. And with the midterms coming up, I did also just want to bring up basically what we've been seeing in the forecast, which seems to have gone all over the place in the last few months. But if the polls as they are now, bear out the way they do, it does look like we may potentially see Republicans take both the House and the Senate. And so, and obviously, I think one thing that's important to note is that we should always take polls with a bit of a grain of salt. Crazier things have happened, and upset elections do happen. We obviously saw 2016 when the polls went one way, and then we saw an upset election in the form of Trump being.
Yeah. By the way, we have Leah Stern back with us in the studio,
Of course,
and
yes.
it is time to have just a discussion. Like, let's just talk.
Yeah, we wanted you to chime in on these issues, Leah, because I guess how stressed are you about these upcoming elections?
I
Loaded question, I know.
yeah, it's stressful, but I want to comment on what you said, Andy. Like, oh, vote for us and we'll give you beer. It's like, what is the modern form of that now? Celebrity endorsements. And it's like, is it true that celebrities most likely leaning to the left, and maybe, okay, if we're all left leaning, that works out for us in the end, whatever. But I think, like, even politicians now, like, the way society is, in our society, it's like everyone is just trying to sell something.
Yes.
It's like, are you giving what you're promised once we vote for you, or are you just trying to sell us something so we vote for you?
This is going to drive you nuts, but I think there's a more visceral comparison to be made. I personally have been working the polls as an IT, and there's much that I can't really speak to for obvious reasons, but it is a legal process to be able to assist a voter if the voter says that you are going to be their assistant. I don't know if many people know this. If you walk into the poll with somebody, you can designate, point at somebody, even if you can barely communicate, say, assistant. And that person will be, after being signed in, allowed to vote for you, essentially. Now, here's the thing. There's no limit on how many times you can do that. And I have personally seen the same faces come in with buses full of the elderly who were obviously promised something, and I can't say that they exactly were because I didn't see that. But these are elderly who are coming in and have absolutely no clue what's going on around them, but say, I gotta vote for Marco Rubio and I gotta vote for, who was it? DeSantis. And then the person that's guiding them, it just does this with like 10 different voters. I think they're just being bribed with like food and money. Like, hey, I'll give you $50. You want $50? Just come with me, all right, and let me be your, just say, point at me, say assistant, and you're gonna have steak, man. It's gonna be super lit.
We'll give you pastelitos.
What do you think about that, Leah?
I think it's so yeah.
It's painful, right?
It's painful, and it's so fascinating, and I think what is so interesting in the past 6 or so years, and maybe beyond that, how polarizing elections have become. And I think, people want to vote for who they believe in, but we're like in the age of misinformation on all sides. And so it's like, what do you believe in? Is that actually going to be promised to you? And where are you getting your information from? And I think on both sides, the issue we have now is echo chambers. If I post something political, everyone who follows me, they all lean the same way I do. I'm not making a difference.
That's right.
And same
Yeah.
with on the other side, people who are more conservative or the alt-right. I don't know if I can say that. Who are they talking to? People who agree with them. And so I think the question is like, how do we make a difference? And this is something that comes up a lot. Like, I have a master's in public health, and this is something that comes up in public health too. It's how do we make a difference for people who've already made up their minds? And the answer is you can't. You have to target the people who are already on the fence.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
I think like getting those messages out, how do we target those people?
That's right.
How do we target them and not bribe them?
And I mean, I got to say, all right, this was something that Izzy and I really wanted to try to do today. All right, to you listening in, all right, we're hoping that you are on the fence, that you're thinking about it, and I'm just trying to I'm reminding you, your vote would absolutely matter. I mean, the people who are voting are all. There's no young people coming in, and you will make a huge difference at any of the precincts you go to. It's early voting. You still have early voting tomorrow and Sunday. Any of the places you go to, you will be able to vote. It's that simple. And you heard it from Froomkin. I mean, we have no option but to vote. And gerrymandering just means it's going to be difficult, more tough for our vote to matter. So we have to come in from all sides and try to get our points across, or we're going to be stuck here. And I mean, we're not going to be able to beat $50 at the elderly home and a steak with some fries and carrots or whatever.
And I think
Right.
that's so important, Andy, because I think it is so easy to feel discouraged and helpless. And listen, in all honesty, like we've all voted for our current president, right? And
Yes.
did a lot
Yes.
of difference happen? I don't know.
I felt some differences. It took 2 years to happen. It felt like it took a whole term. But
Oh, yeah.
Dark Brandon has risen.
And there, people say,
Maybe memes are the secret, don't you think?
I think so. That's a whole other show. Next week on Monkey Hot.
Oh God, yes.
I think
I wish.
Bring
it
us
is
back.
so easy to feel discouraged and so easy to feel like my vote doesn't matter, but it does, because
It so does.
even if you're voting, like, I'm not endorsing this and I'm not endorsing anything, but even if you're voting for a third party candidate, they know they're getting votes. That boosts them, and even if they're not getting elected, you're still supporting them in some way.
Hmm.
So vote for who you feel is the best in your opinion.
Yeah.
Because it might not matter right now or in the short term, or you might not see the immediate effects, but I think there are some long-term effects, and I think that's important. We're young. The long-term effects are going to get us. So if you're young and you're
Yep.
listening,
I mean, it's so important
please don't
because
send us hate messages.
or you know what, text them in. Look, at least interact. That's what we got to do, because if not, by the time we're old enough that we really do care, the things that will have been put in place will be such massive blockages that we won't have a chance to do anything at that point. This is our chance to give ourselves the opportunity to make decisions on behalf of the whole state. And it starts in the county, and it starts, in your decision to get out and vote, and ends with you having a life where you made a difference to it, and you're proud of things that were being voted for, and people around you are discussing and agreeing on what is right.
I completely agree. And one of the challenges that always comes up, and I did ask Professor Froomkin, how do people get more representative candidates on the ballot? But now that I'm thinking about it, to what extent is it really the case that there are insufficiently representative candidates on the ballot versus perhaps us being too confined in our echo chambers, too cynical that we might not see that perhaps some of these candidates do represent us in some way? What do you think?
I mean, being in the dark politically is I think akin to, depression. And I feel like a lot of people kind of understand what that is about. If you feel like nothing is there to help you, you got to understand that feeling is likely, let's just say, duplicitous. and it's getting in the way of something that could work. If the least that you can do is look at candidates that you do not like and just blindly vote against them to anyone else, you are at least recycling someone who you do not think has done their job, and you are giving another person a chance to sit in that seat and maybe represent you. If that's the best you can do, I'm telling you that that's probably significantly better, all right, than allowing someone in office that you don't agree with. You don't need to always be super for the person who is going in. They don't have to be a celebrity. But if you allow people to stay in that you don't like, I mean, that's a different angle. It's a more depressing angle. I don't really, I like to vote for who I like because that's also great. But it's true that sometimes I don't know. Like I don't really like certain candidates that much all the time. But I definitely know who shouldn't be there. Anti-abortion people and stuff like that. But I don't want to get into it too much here right now. But these are the things that are on the ballot. I mean, it's your physical body and your decision to do what you want with it. You got to get those people out unless, we end up in a future where that is the case.
Right. There are some people who are actually still holding out hope for the Democrats, in part because of the results of that Kansas referendum from, I believe it was 2 months ago, in which people who voted in that referendum in Kansas overwhelmingly voted to protect abortion. Now, some people might say that wave has, since passed, but it's entirely possible that we might see it deliver perhaps some surprises in a few days. So,
and you can do it. You've got 2 days left to do the early vote, and if you wait for the harder vote, that's on Tuesday. You can do it too. All right. The turnarounds that happen, it's kind of interesting, is that the entire 2 weeks of early voting can point towards a certain kind of direction. Some candidate who's obviously going to win, because look at that. They're like 60 points ahead.
Yeah. It's almost like it's the smart thing to say, basically, and so everyone else just says it like, oh, yeah, the historical precedent. The guy in power always loses, seats in the both houses.
Yeah, well, the fact is, when it comes to voting day, all right, the day to vote, that one day can often completely change everything that's happened in early voting. And you can be that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Speaking of change, donate to WVUM, by the way, please do.
WVUM.org/donate. Yeah, the way I see it, once you are in the polls, once you are at the ballot, like everything that you've read is out the door. It is you, it is the ballot, it is the candidates, and you absolutely have the chance to make a difference.
I agree. I agree with the importance of voting, and I agree with everything you've said, Andy and Izzy. But I do want to take a step back, and acknowledge that all three of us are coming from a place of privilege to be able to say, go out and vote. Voting makes such a huge difference. When in reality, okay, don't want to plug my master's again.
No, go for it.
Please do.
You worked hard for it.
It's in policy and political analysis. And it's true that a lot of people who, these politicians that we're voting for and these policies that are set in place, on one hand, aren't reaching them. But on the other hand, will disproportionately impact them in a negative way. And these are also the same people who might not have the means to go vote. They don't have a car. They don't have a driver's license. They live in an extremely rural area. There's been changes with the mail, and in rural areas, mail is delayed. Yep. And so, are you getting your mail-in ballot in time? Are you sending it out on time if you are doing a mail-in ballot? I also think, maybe this is an extreme, but there are some people who don't have access to the internet, and they can't look up these candidates. Honestly, I don't want to speak with 100% certainty, but statistically speaking, there probably are some people who don't even know there's election happening right now. And if they don't know that, they don't know WVUM is existing and they're not listening to us.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so I think I just want to acknowledge we are coming from such a place of privilege to be able to say that. And I know the reality in the past few years is voting maybe hasn't been making a huge difference for the people who need it the most. And that sucks so bad.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
It's a very delayed reaction, though. So the thing is that the people whose votes are being suppressed, all right, it doesn't happen in the election booth. It's not like you go to a polling place and you're going to see it with your own eyes. That's not what's happening, all right? It's that the laws that are not voted for in a particular election will continue to make a lack of funding in certain cities for people to be able to even get to their voting place. It'll make it difficult for laws to be put in place that would otherwise protect voters who are I don't disenfranchised. I mean, that's the whole point. You need people to be able to come in and vote, and I think it's an incredible point you made. It's very true. We are lucky that we can. That we can come out here and say, hey, just go vote. I can vote. There are a lot of people who cannot. And we should be voting for them. We should be voting so that they have a chance tomorrow to vote. So keep these things in mind. And
Yes.
God, this has been so much fun.
I
Leah,
know.
thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. And one last piece before we have to go is you mentioned abortion, which we won't get into because that's like an extremely hot button issue. But
We would need at least
Yeah,
another
if
2
we were
hours.
still students, man, we would jump
but
into that.
again, it's like who are I took an abortion policy class, getting my master's, okay, but it's like, and who needs abortion the most? Underprivileged women and underprivileged people who can get pregnant. And it's
That's
like,
right.
These are also the same people that we were just talking about that are most likely to be disenfranchised, most likely to not have the means, most likely for these policies to not be able to impact them, or like I said before, they're disproportionately impacted negatively. And so, again, I just want to acknowledge our place of privilege we have saying all this. But
That's right.
thank you both for having me. This has been a dream come true. It was just tuned in.
It's been a dream for us. We're so happy that we can be back and really have this discussion with the rest of you. And again, for anyone who's from the University of Miami who's listening and who is interested in getting their foot in the radio industry, this is a great place to do it. Please visit WVUM.org. For anyone who wants to donate to this station, please do so at WVUM.org/donate. It was great to be here. Assuming that the world does not explode from here till then, hopefully we'll be back here next year. Let's see.
Yeah,
Life changes.
Next
but,
year, 2 years from now, or maybe 3. It depends on the stress.
Oh, yeah. Anyways, my name is Izzy.
And I'm Andy.
And thank you all for joining us, everyone. And as always, keep it
Keep it
locked.
locked.